Welcome to the Real Faith Podcast with me, your host, Chris Goins, a podcast featuring real talk with real people about God, theology, and life. Our goal, authentic, vulnerable, and raw conversations on a variety of topics with a view towards looking at what God's Word has to say. These conversations will help you apply your faith in God's Word to the real challenges of life. With that, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to the Real Faith Podcast. It's Chris Goins. We're in a series called Headlines, and today I want to deal with a headline that's really close to my heart. So it's just me. I'll be sharing with you for the next few minutes, but this matters to me. Here's the headline that appeared recently in the Washington Post. Church membership in the U.S. has fallen below the majority for the first time in nearly a century. The article went on to say the proportion of Americans who consider themselves members of a church has dropped below 50%, according to Gallup. It's the first time that has happened since they began asking that question in 1937, when church membership was at a high of 73%. Coronavirus pandemic, which forced most churches to close in March 2020, the article continued, has caused a major disruption to American religious life. What's incredibly interesting at this point is what the article said next. Polls have not found a dramatic impact on Americans' religiosity in the past year. In fact, Americans are more likely than people in other countries to say that their religious faith has actually become stronger during the pandemic. WAPO is quoting research by the Pew Research Center. At this point, I've got to say, there seems to be a disparity between what Christians say and what Christians do. Because if all the stats, the research that I just referred to above is true, what Christians seem to be saying is this: we haven't walked away from faith, we haven't walked away from Jesus, but we have walked away from the church, we have walked away from his bride. That's concerning. Kerry Newhoff is a prolific podcaster. He's a highly respected author, former pastor. He's put together a number of very revealing stats regarding church health. I'll just quote one. Churches are back at 36% of what they were on average before COVID. Now, that number has continued to creep up bit by bit over the past few weeks, but churches are still reeling from COVID. In fact, another headline in Axios lamented the following: America's second COVID-19 Easter, marked by low church attendance. Finally, another online site led with this headline: 25 church stats you need to know for 2021. And while the entire article was gripping, a few of the stats really concerned me as a pastor. Here was the lead stat. Non-practicing Christians are on the rise. According to research conducted by the Barna Group, the percentage of practicing Christians has steadily declined over the last 19 years. To an all-time low. Only 1 in 4 Christians now are considered practicing Christians. By the way, the bar Barna used to define a practicing Christian was a rather low bar. Here's how they define a practicing Christian. Only 3 bullets. They identify as Christian. In other words, they say, I'm a Christian. 2, they agree strongly that faith is very important in their lives. In other words, they just say, faith's important to me. And 3, they've attended church within the past month. That's the bar Barna used to define a practicing Christian. And by that bar, Barna says only 1 in 4 Christians are, quote, practicing Christians. And by the way, that bar doesn't meet the biblical criteria for what being a Christian is all about. Well, what's really interesting is this. Barna defined non-practicing Christians as people who self-identified as Christians but don't qualify as practicing. I guess people in that group, non-practicing Christians, are people who say, I am a Christian, but they don't agree strongly that faith is really important, and they haven't attended church within the past month. Now, I appreciate the research of the Barna Group, but the metric they use as to what constitute a practicing and non-practicing Christian is off big time. By the way, when it comes to these very terms, it's important to point out reality here. You can't be a non-practicing Christian. You either are or you aren't. But the first stat that this online article indicated we need to deal with is that non-practicing Christians are on the rise. Second stat, regular church attendance declines. The decline has been steep, especially since COVID. Another stat, tithing numbers still low. One study found only 5% of churchgoers honored God by giving him at least 10% or more of their annual income. Another 30% don't give anything at all. Another stat, in-person attendance is slowly growing. Right now, we're at about 1/3 of where we were pre-COVID. I'm not saying E22 Church, the church I lead. I think we're better than that percentage-wise. But the church in general, the Big C church. Here's my question. Why have Christians been so slow in their return to church? One of our team members struggles with health and physical issues. She has an autoimmune disease that makes her highly susceptible to various illnesses. But she pointed out to me her hunger for being a participant in the church gathered. And while she knows and understands that Jesus can touch us, he's with us wherever we are, he is omnipresent, she's also been fascinated by the fact that people in the New Testament did whatever necessary to get into the presence of Jesus. For instance, the woman with the issue of blood. She pressed her way through the crowd because she needed to get to Jesus. The group of 4 friends literally ripped off a roof to get their friend into the presence of Jesus. So again, her surmising to me was, while Jesus is present everywhere, he is especially present when the church gathers. And while virtual church is a blessing and we thank God for it, why aren't Christians more passionate about pressing into the presence of Jesus? Final stat in this headline that the writer said we need to be aware of. Only 9% of churches said they didn't have any divisiveness within their church during the pandemic. Church unity, the headline read, has been a problem. And by the way, the unity problem isn't fixed by staying away. If there have been unity problems, the unity problem is only fixed by showing up. Absence only exacerbates this unity. It takes showing up in the mess to start paving the way, healing the fractures so that the family can be united again. You don't have to have the answers. You don't have to have a plan. You don't have to have a strategy. All you have to do is be present, show up. Now, I said one more headline, but I guess I'll give you one more headline. Lifeway Research recently posted this headline: churchgoers say they'll return post-COVID-19. 91% plan to attend in-person worship services at least as often as they did before coronavirus. And that includes almost a quarter who say they plan on attending even more than they did previously. Here's the problem. Intention is one thing, action is another. You've heard the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I can't speak to every category or classification that exists. I know that there are a variety of really legitimate reasons as to why people have not returned to in-person worship yet. And I can't speak to every one of those classifications or categories. Please don't make me caveat every statement I make. But for the majority of Christians listening, regardless of where you attend church, it's time for you to act on your intentions. It's time to get back to church. In fact, this made me smile. Another article in an online magazine recently led with this following quote, "Cardinal Dolan is right. It's time to get yourself back to church in person." The article continued. During the week after Easter, the Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, wrote a letter to his flock titled, "It's time to get back to Mass." Dolan acknowledged the national and public health crisis that had kept many away from church. He also emphasized the fact that if you're in a high-risk category, you may still need to use caution. But then Dolan said, and I quote, "For the majority of us, are we going to restaurants, to the kids' soccer and Little League games, to the store, to the beauty parlor, to gatherings with friends and families? Well, then it's time to get back to church." Do you get what Cardinal Dolan was saying? He was saying, if you're going to Walmart, Target, Trader Joe's, if you're going to the mall, if you've been to a movie, if church is the only thing you're not doing as normal again, then it's time to get back. One of my favorite quotes along this line came from one pastor. He's known for pretty outlandish statements, but I liked this one. He said, "Jesus got out of the grave. You can get out of bed, get back to church." I love that. He's right. This past Sunday, Zach Walker was speaking to our congregation, and he talked about one of the necessities, if you're going to live a life that really flourishes, is you need to be planted in the church, And at one point, Zach addressed what he knew would be the pushback from some who would say, I'm too busy. Zach said this, I know you're busy. I know you've got things to do, but Jesus was busy. Jesus saved the world, but Jesus still showed up at synagogue every week. My wife and I were listening remotely, but we wanted to give Zach a high five. That was good stuff. For those of you still not showing up to in-person worship, for those of you still not engaged, it's time for you to ask yourself, what is it that I'm not showing up for? And when you have that answer, ask a follow-up question. Why do I think it's not important I show up for this? Now, the answer to those two questions will reveal a lot about what you think about church and the role it has in your life, and what you think about Jesus and your relationship with him. It may reveal complacency. It may reveal hurt. It may reveal anger. Regardless of what it reveals, it's important that you acknowledge it, address it, and then move past it. Let me define what church really is. It's a lot more than a building. It's certainly a lot more than what we do on Sunday or Fifth Friday or any other gathering. The church is a group of people, ecclesia, who've been called out by God. And the thing they have in common is not their ethnicity. It's not their fashion style. It's not their taste in music. It's not their socioeconomic standing. The thing they have in common is Jesus. They love Jesus. They're passionate about Jesus. They pursue his mission and they live for his glory. That's the church. Church was meant to be a place of fellowship, community, togetherness, oneness, interaction, life, worship, family. And some of that is really difficult if you're only doing it online. Have you ever heard someone say, hey, long distance relationships are difficult? They're difficult for a reason. Relationships require presence. Relationships thrive on presence. Long distance relationships that work, that last because the people in those relationships understand the distance is only temporary. It's not going to be permanent. At some point, we'll be able to give one another the gift of presence. It's the same way with church. Now track with me for a few more moments. I want to speak to you as a pastor who doesn't want something from you. I really want something for you. I've really been burdened about the state of the church in general because I not only love the church I lead, I love the church, Jesus Church. I love it. And God has had me recently in the book of Haggai. It's the second shortest book in the Old Testament. And the message is really simple. Just do it. Put first things first. Build the house of God. Recover your passion for God. And here's a really shortened synopsis of the book. A group of God's people had been captured by an invading army. They had been taken into captivity. And after approximately 70 years, they had been released from captivity. They had returned to Israel about 15 years ago. And they had made some feeble attempts to get rid of the debris left over from the Babylonian invasion. They tried to lay the foundation of the temple of God, to rebuild, restore the house of God. They started the rebuilding project. But things got tough. They hit some opposition. Things were difficult. Things didn't come together as they imagined. So they walked off the job. They went on their way with their own busy lives. It's really interesting what happened next. See if you can draw the analogies together. Homes were built, stores reopened, commerce was reestablished, fields were planted, crops were harvested. Life pretty much returned to normal, depending on how you define normal. And somehow, this group of people got used to living without the house of God. They got busy with lots of other stuff. They built some really cool houses with some really nice amenities. In fact, depending on which translation you read in Haggai 1, it says, you're living in paneled houses or luxurious homes. They created themselves some really busy and apparently productive lives. I mean, they created their own businesses, sports leagues, music, dance, art academies for their kids so they could squeeze all of them into the minivan and run from one activity to the next. I say in gist. They built some pretty impressive businesses so they could print their own business cards and hand them out at meet and greet. None of this, by the way, is necessarily bad. Except this, in the middle of building cool homes, creating cool lives, they allowed their own personal priorities to become more important than God's priorities, and they forgot God's house. God basically looked at this group of people and said this, you want proof that you've misplaced your priorities? Look at your own homes and then look at my home. It's in ruins. And God said this is a word for us. I'm paraphrasing loosely. You keep procrastinating. You keep saying, there'll be a better time. You keep saying, I'll get around to it sooner or later. Well, it's later. It's been 15 years. And if you want to know why you're experiencing a lack of fulfillment, satisfaction, and this constant sense that there's got to be more, if you want to know why you keep experiencing that gnawing in your gut, that sense that something is out of whack, it's because something is out of whack. It's you. You're not putting first things first. You've misplaced your priorities. And God goes so far as to say, nothing in your life will actually work until you realign your priorities. Let me read from Haggai 1:6 in the Message. You've spent a lot of money, but you haven't much to show for it. You keep filling your plates, but you never get filled up. You keep drinking and drinking and drinking, but you're always thirsty. You put on layer after layer of clothes, but you can't get warm. Your wages disappear as though you were putting them in pockets filled with holes. God says the problem is you've built your own house, but you've neglected my house. Rebuild the house of God. Why? Why? Here's the message of Haggai. Because the house of God is a symbol of your relationship with God. And the house of God disregarded, neglected, in disrepair or in dilapidation is a symbol that our hearts are in the same condition before God. God says, get your lives, your priorities into alignment, and then watch what I'll do. I love this story. Several years ago, Bono, lead singer of U2, said, I used to ask for God to bless my family, a tour, a song. God, I had this crazy idea. Could I have a blessing on it? But Bono said, but then a really wise man asked me to stop. He said, Bono, stop asking God to bless what you're doing. Get involved with what God is already doing because it's already blessed. Oh, I love that. Sounds a lot like something Henry Blackaby wrote years ago in his breakthrough curriculum, Experiencing God, when he challenged us, instead of constantly asking God to bless what you're doing, start doing what God has already blessed. And I love this quote from Blackaby. He said, if Christians around the world were to suddenly renounce their personal agendas, their life goals, their aspirations, and begin responding in radical obedience to everything God showed them, the world would be turned upside down. How do I know this? Because that's what the first century church did, and the world is still talking about it. That's the message of Haggai 1. So here's what I want to ask you, regardless of where you attend church. Ask yourself this question. What kind of church would my church be if everybody in it was just like me? If everybody prayed just like me, if everybody fasted just like me, if they lived in love just like me, if they worshiped just like me, if they gave and served just like me, if they invited their friends just like me, if they welcomed guests and outsiders just like me, if they attended just like me. Depending on whose stats you use, churches are struggling. Somewhere between 4,000 to as many as 10,000. I know big gap. Churches in the U.S. close every year, and that was before COVID. The numbers have escalated since. Get this. I've spent more than 35 years of my life doing ministry within the context of the local church. I love the church. I love it. I heard about Jesus through the ministry of a local church. My life calling was formed, honed, nurtured, leveraged through the ministry of the local church. Growing up, my closest friends were friends I met and connected with through the local church. I met my wife in the local church. I was 10, she was 8. It was love at first sight for her. I'm joking. The church became the support system through which Janet and I built our marriage. We'll celebrate 38 years together in June. And I know the church has had a big role in helping us stay together. The church became the support system and educational system that taught us what it looked like to raise kids, do life, grow in becoming more and more like Jesus. It was the church. To this day, my closest friends and relationships in the world are a byproduct of my connection with the church. I love the church. When COVID hit 14 months ago, churches had to quickly pivot and move ministry online for the protection of those they were called to serve. That was the right move, the right call. But that interruption in gathering weekly was supposed to be temporary. But as weeks and months were on and on, many Christians got out of the habit, the routine of making church, going to church, showing up for a worship experience, any kind of priority. And I already can hear the pushback. I know what you're going to say. You don't go to church, Chris. You are the church. I get the sentiment behind that statement. In fact, in some ways, I can appreciate the statement, but it's not entirely true. That statement pits being the church against going to church. It pits mission against fellowship and community, and they aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're actually dependent upon one another. The church gathered for worship is the huddle. The church on mission is the game. But you've got to have the huddle if you really want to execute the game. Unfortunately, after 14 months of COVID, many have reduced church to watching a portion of 1 hour live stream, or watching an on-demand experience, or listening to a podcast on Monday morning. But church can't be reduced to a podcast, a live stream, an on-demand viewing option. It's about experiencing God in the context of the gathered community of believers. It's about worshiping with others, praying for others, talking with others, hurting with others, celebrating with others, serving with others. Again, I want to give you my definition for the church. It's a lot more than a building or what we do on Sunday. It's a group of people, the ecclesia, who have been called out by God. And the thing they have in common is not their ethnicity, not their fashion style, not their taste in music, not their political preferences, not their socioeconomic standing. The thing they have in common is Jesus. They love Jesus. They're passionate about Jesus. They pursue his mission. They live for his glory. And we need to get together. In fact, let me give you the biblical basis of what the church is all about. Here's what the Bible says about Christians in church. Christians should get together often to hear God's word and worship Jesus. In the book of Acts, it was actually daily. And it's a pattern all throughout the book of Acts, all throughout the epistles. Second bullet, Christians should get together in smaller groups to love one another, serve one another, celebrate one another, pray for one another. That's Acts 2:46. And finally, when Christians can't get together physically with other believers due to sicknesses or physical challenges, they should ask other believers to come to them and pray for them so that they can be healed. That's James chapter 5. So in closing, let me give you some reasons that we need to get back to church. Here they are. You ready? Number one, it's an expression of my love for God. Psalm 69 verse 6, David said, passion for your house has consumed me. In John 2:17, that verse gets applied to Jesus in reference to his love and passion for his Father's house. Hey, whenever you show up for church, you're actually making a statement. I love God. My relationship with God is important to me. 2, it connects me with people who will encourage, motivate, and strengthen me. This is Hebrews 10:24 and 25. Let's think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, not avoiding worshiping together as some are in the habit of doing, but spurring one another on, especially as the day of his coming draws near. We need this gathering to encourage, motivate, strengthen, inspire one another. We're desperate for this. In fact, recently, one of our team members, Amy Fitzgerald, talked with me about an experience she had getting her nails done. Amy is a single woman in her 40s. First time in over a year, she went to a salon to get her nails done. And she said at the end of getting her nails done, the technician does a massage of your hands. And Amy said, when the nail technician began to massage my hands, I almost came apart. I almost broke down and began to weep because I realized this is the first time I've been touched by another human being in a year. Amy later wrote to me, touch starvation is an actual thing. Think about it. As soon as babies are born, they're laid on the mother's chest for skin-to-skin touch. Fathers are encouraged to also do skin to skin contact. It's vital for the baby's sense of security, safety, comfort, growth to have immediate and continuous touch. The point is, we need each other. We need to be touched by each other. A hug, a handshake, a fist bump, praying for one another, laying hands on one another, a smile, a nod, a wave. It touches hearts. Isn't it interesting? Throughout the Bible, healing was bestowed and restored. Gifts were activated, faith ignited, blessing given, comfort shared through touch, through the laying on of hands. This is another reason we need to come together. Third bullet. It brings a special and dynamic awareness of God's presence. There's something that happens when we get together that can't be replicated. As good as online is, this can't be replicated. Jesus said it this way, Matthew 18:20, when 2 or 3 of you get together in my name, I'm there. I know the Holy Spirit is everywhere present. He is omnipresent. But he is especially present when his kids get together. Question, if Jesus called you up and asked to meet with you because he missed you, it's been a while since he's seen you, he wanted you guys to catch up, would you tell him, oh, I'm sorry, I just don't have the time, can't fit it into my schedule. I just don't feel like it. Of course not. If you love Jesus, there's no answer you would give to Jesus, but absolutely Jesus. Just tell me when, tell me where. Get this, church on Sunday is a standing appointment to meet with Jesus. And when you come, you know he's going to show up because he's promised it. When you go to church, you're not going for the pastor. Though I'm sure your pastor loves seeing you. I know I love seeing our people. You're not going for your friends, though it's nice to get a hug, a fist bump, a smile. You're not going to get prayed for, though I'm certain your church would be glad to pray for you. You're going for the main reason, to meet with Jesus, period. Everything else is just extra. Fourth reason we need to get back. It can 10x your faith. Getting together with God's people can actually 10x your faith, strength, and your ability to overcome. Because of the covenant you have with God, you're already strong. In fact, Joshua 23:10 says this, there's a sense in which each of you single-handedly can put 1,000 to flight. That's good. It gets even better in Deuteronomy 32, verse 30, which says, how could one put 1,000 to flight and 2 put 10,000 to flight unless God had been in the arrangements? Sometimes we miss the principle wrapped up in that statement. I'm 10 times stronger because I'm worshiping with you. My faith is stronger. My worship is more vibrant. My life is better. My strength more resilient. 1 can put 1,000 to flight, 2, 10,000. Finally, here's the 5th reason to get back. It turns up the power of prayer. Jesus said it this way, Matthew 18:19, when 2 of you get together on anything at all on earth and make a prayer of it, my Father in heaven goes into action. Christians, it's time to get back to church. A Christian who is not connected in vibrant community with a local church is a contradiction in terms. I'll close with this parable. It's the parable of the great feast, Luke 14. An invitation is sent out. Several begin to make excuses. So the person sending out the invitation says this, there's still room for more. So the master of the feast said, go out into the country lanes and behind the hedges, urge anyone you can find to come so that my house will be full. Let me give you God's desire this Sunday, wherever you go to church. It's that his house be full. You have an open invitation to sit with Jesus this Sunday in your local church. Are you telling him you're too busy? Or are you going to show up excited, expectant, and ask, okay, Jesus, what's on the menu today? I am ready. Christians, it's time to get back to church. Thanks for joining us for the Real Faith Podcast. God bless. This has been the Real Faith Podcast with Chris Goins. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.